Hello, everyone, and welcome back to What Time Is It? The number one talk show where we share opinions about African culture, development, entertainment, and lifestyle. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Ntube Nane, and I am your host. Today, we're going to be talking about 10 things to know about Africa, part 2. If you haven't watched the video on part 1, you may want to do so. Let's just go ahead and dive right away into this video. Point number 1. Africa is a tropical continent with two main seasons. That's the dry season and the rainy season. And it's also known that Africa harbors one of the wettest places in the world, namely Dibuncha, which is found in Cameroon. It rains in Dibuncha for about 9 or 10 months in a year. Dibuncha is primarily a very, very wet place. It's always raining. But Africa, as a continent, generally has the rainy and the dry season, even though some places like South Africa, you would get a little snow, and sometimes we get hailstones. That's basically like it's raining ice. That said, let's move on to point number 2. Point number 2, Africa harbors some of the world's richest soils, which makes agriculture very easy. And something else that makes agriculture very easy for any country in the continent of Africa is the climatic condition. Like I said, Africa has a longer summer and 3 months of rainy season. So when it's summer in America, typically it's the rainy season back in most countries in Africa. But because of the beautiful climatic condition of the continent, it's very easy for plants to grow or for crops to grow, making conditions necessary for agriculture to be very favorable in that continent. That said, let's move on to point number 3. Contrary to public opinion, Africa actually holds majority of the world's minerals and natural resources like gold, diamond, copper, and just to name a few, and of course even oil. Africa has large deposits of these mineral resources or very natural resources, which makes it one of the richest continents in the world. Let's move on to the next point, which is point number 4. Point number 4. Prior to colonization, Africa had a very stable economy, and trade by barter was the means of exchange of goods. Like what trade by barter was is if you have plantains, for instance, you bring your plantains and I have cocoyams, we exchange the cocoyams for the plantains and everyone goes home happy. And eventually Africans introduced the use of cowries as a means of trade. So money is not something that was brought to Africa. Africans came up with the concept of something that could be used as a financial exchange, which was cowries. So in case you did not know this, now you know. Africa had a very stable economy before slavery and colonization messed everything up for the continent. Let's move on to the next point, which is point number 5. Civilization started in Africa. Yes, civilization did start from Africa. Some of the musical instruments you enjoy today originated from Africa. Namely, the xylophone is an African instrument. Drums. You have even the buildings concept of houses did come from the African civilization. If you ever doubt it, please look it up. Civilization did begin in Africa. Now that you know, let's move on to the next point, which is point number 6. Drums were a means of communication in the African continent before Western civilization was brought in. So Africans would communicate through drums, and even until present day Africa, most countries still communicate by drums. In my culture, which is Bakosi, there's a certain sound that if you hear, you know that you need to gather somewhere. There's a certain drum that they play when there's trouble. So Africans had like a sound or we still do have it. Most African countries actually still have sounds that they play on the drum to signify death, a celebration, to call people to meet at a certain place, and all of that. So Africa was a very, very organized continent before chaos was brought in. But let's not dwell on that in this video. Let's move on to the next point, which is point number 7: education in Africa. African education primarily was done through storytelling, or folk tales, like we would like to call them. Basically, knowledge was passed down from one generation to the other via folk tales and stories. Now, because we did not write down stuff, a lot of our history has gone missing in the process. But that's something that Western civilization has done so much to change. But regardless, Africans did have a way of writing. If you look at the Egyptians, for instance, we had symbols. African countries would write using symbols, which would signify certain things, and it was a means of communication. It's just so sad that these things were never developed upon, because Western civilization came in and changed a lot of things, and some of those things have actually been lost. But we still have some history textbooks that hold some of this knowledge. But yes, we did have a form of writing. We had a formal educational system. We had universities back then, and schools, because it wasn't the regular kind of school, but kids a certain age would always gather, and the older person or the elder person in the community would teach them and just pass down knowledge. So yes, if you did not know this, now you know. Education has always been a part of the African continent, and it has just evolved with time and accepted or incorporated Western knowledge and ideas. So that said, let's move on to the next point, which is point number 8. Africans have been known for the extensive use of proverbs, and proverbs generally differ from country to country in Africa. An example of a common proverb in the continent of Africa would be, "What an older person sees sitting down, a young man cannot see even when they climb a coconut tree." So mostly language, when it comes to the continent of Africa, has made very good use of proverbs since time immemorial. And this is something that even to this generation of Africans still make very good use of proverbs and their interpretations and what they mean. If you have never known about proverbs before, you can look it up, and hopefully you find something interesting that you can use on a paper or on a speech and what have you. That said, let's move on to the next point, which is point number 9. Africa holds some of the world's best touristic sites, like lakes, mountains, parks, or national reserves for some of the animals that are basically going extinct in the world, which presents a very, very good place for tourism. So if you ever wanted to visit any African country, please check out what they have in their touristic database. Cameroon, for instance, holds one of the world's many twin lakes. Bakosi people of Cameroon have a volcano which has 2 crater lakes. They typically refer to as twin lakes, hot springs, and what have you. So if you are ever thinking of taking a vacation where you just want to bond with nature, the continent of Africa should be able to provide some natural touristic sites for you to enjoy and learn about if you haven't been to one before. So that said, let's move on to the last point, which is point number 10. Point number 10 is something that goes more on the social side. Africans, as a matter of culture, are very particular about greeting, addressing older persons. Now, it's very common for any country in Africa. You cannot walk past someone who's older than you without saying good morning or good afternoon or good evening. Now, most African countries believe greeting is not just a sign of respect, but kind of sets the tone for the day. And that's why if you listen to how most or different African countries or different tribes actually would say good morning, it just tells you how intentional Like for instance, the Bali people of Cameroon will tell you when they say good morning, they'll tell you Olani Osangi Mbonket, which means which primarily it's good morning, but if you translate it, it's kind of saying that did you sleep well? You know, so it sets a tone for the rest of your day. Where I come from, though, basically, good morning is asange, and you normally respond in a wampe, which means is it morning, or it's kind of like saying you're blessed to have seen a new day. So greeting in the African culture is very important, and that's why because of how respectful the African culture is, most Africans or most people from African countries who travel to the Western world or Western countries find it difficult adjusting to a little kid addressing you by your name, or like in America, kids would typically say, hi, hello. When I first came to America, I struggled with that with my nieces and nephews. And even until now, it's something that I still don't let them do. You know, I'd rather you say good morning, auntie, or good afternoon, auntie, or good evening. The hi, hello doesn't work well with me. I guess I'm still very cultural, and I don't think I'd want to change that, because good morning presents an environment for a conversation. How did you sleep? Versus hi or hello. You know, it just feels like you're just brushing it off. But the morning is a very precious thing for the continent of Africa in terms of culture. Therefore, people are very intentional about saying good morning, or very intentional about respect. Now, if that's something you did not know about Africans in general, and you've had problems with your colleagues, maybe, or some of your African colleagues wanting to address you by sir or ma'am, it's a cultural thing. It's disrespectful to address your boss by their name. It's disrespectful to address an older person by their name. So most people would typically want to throw in the sir or ma'am or miss or whatever they choose to use. So that said, we have come to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed watching this. And as always, I appreciate you for taking your time to check out my videos. And as always, please do not forget, sharing is caring and knowledge is power. Therefore, sharing knowledge is caring powerfully. So do not forget to like and share this video. And until next time, you've been watching What Time Is It? Thank you.